Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin and discuss a potential upcoming capitulation. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I want to start off by saying I do understand that the word capitulation is likely to evoke certain emotions out of you. And in 2018 and in 2014, I sort of ignored the idea of a further capitulation because it always seemed like, we're already 70% down. How could it possibly go down anymore? And I was wrong, right? In 2018, we had another 50% capitulation at the very end where we went down. It happened in 2014 as well. And there's a chance, again, that it could happen in 2022. So I want to show you some of the similarities. I'm not saying anything has to play out, but I think it is your responsibility as an investor to plan for this potential outcome, okay? And I want to talk about some of the similarities that I'm seeing and that I felt back then and kind of what's playing out today. Now, if you were around crypto in 2018, you will likely remember the 6K support level, okay? We held that 6K support level for a long time, right? We did. We held it for a long time. It felt like it was never really going to break. And what's interesting is that if you look at these wicks, right? If you look at these wicks, the lowest wick occurred before we actually had final capitulation. The lowest wick occurred and it went down to 57.43 and it happened in June. Okay? So I want to show you the very similar the very similar type of structure that occurred back then that's occurring today as well. Okay, so we had a capitulation wick in June that went lower than it had in any prior month. Okay, so I mean, yes, we had 58.93 over here, but that was still higher than this one at 57.43. Now, what you'll notice after June, okay, so after June, after this candle right here, we had a 20% rally in July, right? We had a counter trend rally, a bear market rally in July. You will notice capitulation wick in June, capitulation wick in June, okay? 2018, 2022. What's interesting, in the same way in 2018 that marked the local bottom until November, we're also potentially seeing the same thing play out yet again, okay? Because despite the fact that Bitcoin has tested the lows multiple times, we have not gone below that prior June low. Okay? So we might argue that this low was at 57.43. So it was just below 6K. It was just below 6K. What's interesting about that is that one might argue that we're seeing the same thing play out, but this time it's going just below 18K. All right. Now, I know these might be scary numbers, but it is what it is, right? It is what it is. We have to at least admit that there are some similarities between the 6K bottom in 2018 and the 18K bottom so far. So in 2022, note that in 2018 it was just below 6K, and in 2022 it was just below 18K. But what you'll notice is that we went down in June, had our capitulation. We went down in June, had our capitulation. Then in July, we had a counter trend rally back up. Same thing happened in 2022. And then what happened? August, September, October, just 3 months down. 1, 2, 3. Relatively small moves down, but they were down nonetheless, right? 1, 2, 3 in a row. We are potentially seeing the same thing play out. Now, the monthly candle for October is not in yet, so we can't fully know if it's actually going to close red or not. We still have half the month to go. But we did open the month at 19.4. Currently, we're just sitting at around 19.1 to 19.2. So there is a risk that, in fact, this could be our third red month in a row after that counter trend rally in July. What you will remember is that the capitulation for Bitcoin in 2018 actually started in November. Okay, it started in November, the actual major capitulation. And then it ended in December. All right, so major capitulation in November, and then it ended in December. If we see the same thing play out yet again, then we could easily be looking at another capitulation candle in, sometime the next month or two. Okay, if it follows the same pattern, it would be in November. Now, we should admit that history does not always play out the exact same way, right? And you can look back at this bear market over here and say that it wasn't always the same. For instance, in 2018, April was our bear market rally month, whereas in 2022 it was more so like February and March, not April. So it certainly has not played out in the exact same way. But since June, there have been a lot of eerie similarities, and I think it's at least worth paying attention to. Now, I know a lot of you might disagree with me and say there's no reason to even be talking about this because you think Bitcoin is bottomed, and there are a lot of indicators that suggest that Bitcoin is bottomed. I mean, I know this as well. I mean, I have a ton of indicators on the website, and certainly some of them would say the bottom is in, but there still are some that don't, right? There still are some that don't. And I think it's worthwhile to at least give those indicators, some respect, right? To say, you know what? Historically, these indicators have been fairly good at calling bottoms, and they're not yet showing a major bottom. I can't help but think to myself too, these indicators that we've been talking about on the channel. I just put out a video yesterday on the 1-year ROI. These videos about these metrics, they were made within a secular stock market bull market. Okay, so for me, it would make sense that the indicators that bottomed within a secular bull market for stocks should also bottom during a potential recession where the stock market is in a larger decline than we've really seen since Bitcoin's been around. So to me, it doesn't make sense to just discount these indicators and say, it's just too greedy to expect all of them to bottom. My counterpoint to such a statement would just be to say, well, these things bottomed in the past when we were not worried about a recession. So why would they not bottom this time? And that's why I do think there is a very strong likelihood of Bitcoin eventually putting in a lower low. There have been a lot of arguments about whether the bottom is in or not. I've sort of given my opinion many times. I think the real discussion is if the next bottom is the bottom, not this one. I will admit that I could be wrong, and believe me, I've been wrong about plenty of things. I think there is a strong case to suggest that Bitcoin has not yet bottomed on its USD pair, especially with the stock market continuing to push lower, okay? And the inability of the Fed to print because of soaring inflation. Risk assets are just under pressure right now. And it makes sense that as long as this is the case, there should be a somewhat bearish bias to a lot of these risk assets. If they did very well when there was a lot of money printing, we could easily assume that the reverse would be true when they sort of take that back, when they take that era away from us. So if you go look, this sort of, and I'm gonna like actually like zoom this in a little bit. Let's go to the daily, okay? And we're gonna look at 2018 really quick. What you'll notice is that starting in June, after that first capitulation down in June, we technically were putting in higher lows. Technically speaking, we were putting in higher lows. But we were also putting in lower highs, okay? We're also putting in lower highs. And once these two sort of came to meet, we broke out to the downside, right? We broke out to the downside. If you go look at 2022 so far, you may be surprised to know we've technically been putting in higher lows since June. So far, we have not actually been putting in a lower low. If you look, this wick here in June was all the way down to 17,585. This one over here in September was down to 18,3, this one was down to 18,152. And then the one we got the other day was actually slightly higher at 18,160. So technically, we're putting in higher lows in the same way that we were putting in higher lows over here in 2018. We're doing it over here in 2022. But also, we're noticing we're putting in lower highs as well. So every rally is getting sold off, right? Every rally so far has just been getting sold off, and every single rally is weaker than the one that came before it, right? If you look over here in 2018, the rally just kept weakening, right? We had one really cool, really great rally in July. A lot of people FOMO'd back in. I was one of them, right? And then this was back in 2018. And this one, in this bear market, I've just been, as I said before, I think cash is king. I've been suckered back into these bear markets in crypto so many times in the past that I'm just like, to hell with it. Like I'm just gonna wait. But bear market rally in July 2018, a lower high in September. Go look at 2022, right? Bear market or bottom in June, bear market rally in July, and then we had a high in August, and then a lower high in September. I mean, it is playing out more or less the same way, right? A high, this high sort of came at the very end of July, but then again a lower high in September, and then it got really boring. From about September 7th until about mid-November, we just went sideways. I mean, it was extremely boring at the time, and I was fairly complacent. I didn't really think anything of it, and I know a lot of people thought we were going to go higher. I thought we would too, and then ultimately the floor broke. We just sort of capitulated down, and it wasn't that dissimilar from what we saw in 2014 either, where eventually we just sort of capitulated down. Right, we had a floor here in April. We had our bear market rally. We had a floor again in October. We had a bear market rally, and then we eventually had our capitulation that ended in early 2015. Okay, you go to today or 2018, very similar structure going into the end of the year. You look at 2022, very similar structure going into the end of the year. And so, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say what has to happen or anything like that. And I'm sure a lot of people watching this video are not really pleased. But as an investor in crypto, I do think you owe it to yourself to try to remain objective, and no matter how convinced you are of a potential outcome, to consider the alternative scenario. And you could say the same thing to me. Like, should I consider the alternative scenario where Bitcoin breaks back out to the upside? Yeah, it's possible. And I am hedged, right? I do have some Bitcoin. I do think it's important to hedge. But I cannot help but look at some of the similarities between what we saw happen back in 2018, what we're seeing play out today. There's a lot of jittery investors with what the Federal Reserve is doing with raising interest rates as quickly as they are. And given the fact that the economy is slowing down, the stock market continues to put in lower lows, it's hard to imagine that Bitcoin will be able to sort of hold this forever. So if it continues to follow what happened in 2018, we would eventually see a capitulation. What's interesting is there are some confluence on other indicators that we've previously talked about. One of them is just simply to compare the prior bear markets. And if you compare them, we're right where we normally are. I mean, orange line again is 2018. This red one is 2014. Green one is the one we're currently in. And you can see right now that we're sort of in between the final capitulation that we had in 2018 and the one we had in 2014 and early 2015. We're sort of in between that in terms of time after the prior all-time high that was back in November. Now, of course, a lot of people want to point towards the April peak. And if you compare the ROI from the April peak, you could say we've gone well past this. But if you just compare it from November, it actually does look a bit more like what we've always seen. And so I'll continue to take the more conservative approach and assume that it's more likely to just continue following the path that we've seen occur multiple times. So this is an important chart, and I think it's worthwhile to consider. And as I said yesterday, when we put out the video on the 1-year ROI of Bitcoin, that's something that I also think is worth just considering and saying, this is historically at bottoms at about 0.2. The best way for it to bottom at 0.2 would be for it to go down to the 13 to 14K range sometime in the next month or two. Okay, and then it would probably hit around that 0.2 level because we're comparing it to 69K, and 20% of around 69K, or at least where the daily close was, gets you to around that 13 to 14K level. And so there is some confluence. It's not just simply looking at this chart and saying, well, it's a lower high and a higher low, and it has to break down to the downside, because the bulls could simply point out other things, like, for instance, pointing out things like the 200-week moving average and whatnot. And guys, I mean, if you've watched this channel at all, I mean, we were always discussing our date with destiny that we would eventually have. But look, we're below the 200-week. It's not offering any level of support. And in fact, you could argue that it's actually offering more of a resistance than any level support. The 300 week is something that we're getting very close to. And as I said before, there's an argument to be made that every cycle we're going down one of these major moving averages, and perhaps we'll even go down to one that's even further down. So I think it's important to look at some of these more bearish indicators, especially considering these recessionary fears that we have going into 2023, and to say, this could easily play out in the same way it has before. And this was all during a secular bull market with traditional finance, traditional markets. This one is potentially not. So why should we discount an indicator that was built during a secular bull market during our first potential real bear market within traditional markets? So I think it makes sense to err on the side of caution and to at least plan for a potential capitulation by Bitcoin. There are some other indicators that we could look at as well that don't necessarily show a bottom. I've talked about a lot of these before. I'm sure you guys are very familiar with them. But I mean, just to give you to give you one more example, there still are a few others. The balance price is normally, you can see that major bottoms with Bitcoin occur after capitulation below the balance price. It happened over here in 2011. It happened again in 2015. It happened again in 2018. Hasn't yet happened this cycle, right? We haven't gone below the balance price. The balance price right now is actually sitting just below 16K. It's at 15.95K. And normally we go below that before major market cycle bottoms are actually in. So this is another example, I think, of preparing for potential downside as we get into the next few months. You should know, and I've said this a number of times on my channel, you should know that if we have another major capitulation and Bitcoin does see that correction at the end of the year, basically every indicator will have bottomed, okay, for Bitcoin. Specifically, like if you look at any indicator or most indicators that you could have imagined that Bitcoin could have, whether it's on-chain, whatever it might be, most of them, if not all of them, will say the bottom is in if Bitcoin gets another major lower low, right? Where it drops another 30%, 40%, whatever. If that happens, then essentially all the indicators will say the market has bottomed. And that's why I think, I've said this before, for me personally, I haven't put too much mental energy into thinking that this is the bottom, although I do admit that it could be. This is the exact same level that I would have thought was the bottom in 2018, and I was wrong, okay? So this would have been the same level that I thought was the bottom back over here. So it'd be funny if it didn't play out the same way. Maybe it goes back up. But I just want to make sure that this time I'm fully prepared for what Bitcoin may throw my way, rather than just be blind to all these similarities and say that it just simply can't play out like that because of because of the RSI or something like that. These things are not the best indicators, in my opinion, to use, especially when we're looking at a potential recession. So looking at this, if we do play out like 2018, we still could have some weeks here where it's just really boring and people slowly lose interest. And then if we do see some type of major capitulation, I'm guessing, whether it's the bottom or not, there will likely be a strong rally off that level, okay? Whether it's the bottom or not, I think we would see, if we do see some type of capitulation, we would see some type of strong rally after it, because all things considered, this would have been the typical bottom for Bitcoin, right? Like you go sideways at about 70% down for months and months and months. This was going back to this other chart, right? The if I go back to say like the bear market chart, you go sideways for 60 to 70% down forever and ever, and then eventually you see final capitulation. This would be your typical bear market bottom for Bitcoin, right? Like that wouldn't be out of the ordinary. So for me personally, I think the real discussion about Bitcoin's bottom would occur at the next lower low, and that's where I think the more relevant argument becomes as to, okay, is that the bottom? Because based on everything we've seen with the indicators, it would be. Or do we see some type of longer recession where it pushes Bitcoin down further? And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm proposing it to you to think about, because if we do get a lower low, all the indicators will say. I mean, essentially they'll say the bottom is in. There still are a few that say the bottom is not in. Admittedly, more indicators would say the bottom is in than it not being in. But I suppose just as being a relatively risk averse investor, and sort of just going back to my video from early 2021 or 2022, cash is king, right? And you just have to be patient. Sometimes you just have to let this year pass you by, and not don't worry so much about these counter turn rallies, these bear market rallies. These altcoins can go up a lot, and they just come right back down, right? They just come right back down. Furthermore, another concerning piece is, and I've talked about this a lot, right? Is the dominance of Bitcoin is still relatively low. Look, guys, normally when the dominance is this low, it's not a good thing, right? It's just not. You get to the January 2018, Bitcoin, the entire market corrected. We had a bear market rally where Ethereum led it in 2018, and then Bitcoin came back down, and then it just went right back up. It was the same level we just went down to again, right? Same level. When the Bitcoin dominance is this low, and the market conditions look as weak as they are, it's usually not a good thing, right? It usually means the altcoins are slowly bleeding out, and they are. I mean, look at this. Like, a lot of these altcoins are already bleeding out. I've said for a long time, I think we're going to have another altcoin reckoning, and some people say, well, altcoins have corrected 80% already. And my response is, yeah, but just because they've corrected 80% doesn't mean they can't do the same thing again. This is what's happened time and time again in crypto, right? You see one at the beginning, and then you see one at the end. And so if the Bitcoin dominance were to just play out like it normally does, you would expect to see it go much higher. And I think it's already happening. I mean, I think you're slowly seeing the slow deterioration of the altcoin market. It's not flashy, right? But 2% here, 3% over there. And before you know it, all the altcoins, or a lot of them, are down another 50%, right? And you're just like, where did it go, right? I mean, it's just like a very slow and painful bleed. This surge by the Bitcoin dominance over here lasted like 3 months or so before it really slowed down at all. And arguably, we've only just started over the last few weeks. We've only just started, say, another potential move up by the dominance of Bitcoin. So I have to look at all this and couple it with traditional markets, couple it with what the Fed is doing, raising interest rates, rolling off assets from their balance sheet. The economy is slowing down, and say, you know what? Do I get the counterpoints from the bullish perspective? Do I understand what they are? Yeah, because I have all those on my website. Like I do. But as a risk averse investor, I have to remain cautious given the macro headwinds, and then just simply given a few of the indicators that were built during a secular bull market still don't show that the bottom is in. Okay, and this is just my own personal convictions. I don't necessarily expect everyone to have the same conviction, but that's where I currently sit. And I will continue to follow this. And if it does play out, if we do get a major capitulation, then we get to have the more interesting discussions. All right, what is next for Bitcoin? Because after we get out of 2022, we have 2023, and normally the year after the bear market is quite volatile. I mean, you could even see a lower low on some exchanges. We even did see a lower low in 2015 later on. Not every exchange, but some of them, we bottomed over here, but technically we actually went a little bit lower in late 2015 as well. But these years, the year after a fairly well-defined bear market can be quite choppy. And then the year after that, you get back into the bull market phase, right? I mean, 2024, hopefully the Fed is done doing whatever they need to do, raising interest rates, try to get inflation back down. I don't really think inflation is going to be back down to 2% by then, but hopefully it could be down to maybe 4% or something. And hopefully we can go from there into the next Bitcoin halving. But I think it's important to get through 2022, just recognize it is what it is, right? It's a bear market. Just call it what it is, right? It's been a bear market the entire year. I would say it's important to prepare for potentially lower prices. Not to say that they necessarily have to happen, but to say, look, it's happened in 2014, happened in 2018, when the macro looked a lot better. Why can't it happen in 2022? So I think it makes sense to at least plan for that potential outcome. And then if it does play out and we do see that lower low, to then sort of discuss what that means for going into 2023 and how do you prepare for a future bull market. Again, as an investor, it is your duty to consider all possible outcomes, not just the ones you want. Okay, I've spent a lot of time trying to trying to consider various outcomes and whatnot. And I do think it's important to consider all possible outcomes. There's enough channels out there and enough people saying that the bottom is in that I don't need to show those perspectives, because I think a lot of other people have done it already. I am here to show you there is a bearish perspective in all this, and it very well could play out over the next month or two. And if it does, and you didn't plan for it, you have no one to blame but yourself, because it would have been the same exact thing that we saw during the last several bear markets. With that, I will leave you. Try to remember, I'm just trying to stay objective. That's it. Trying to just be objective. Remember to subscribe to the channel if you guys like the content. Give the video a thumbs up. We also do have Into the Cryptoverse Premium if you'd like to follow all of these charts in real time, or at least on a daily basis. They're updated once a day. And so you can check it out, intothecryptoverse.com. We'll wrap it up there. Thank you guys for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.